Has anyone read this or heard this? Okay. It's well, and he did not deliver this as a speech. It was just a letter, and it was published in a Philadelphia newspaper. He just handed it off to a newspaper editor, and then it got copied and reprinted all around the country. And I think 1796.
That is correct.
Yeah, so he was born about 300 years ago, and this happened about 230 years ago. And the language is a little tricky. So I'm going to give just like a little bit of an outline of what to expect. And the topics that he covers, I think the trickiest parts are the beginning and the end, which are just kind of like stuck in this like formal speak, where it's just like tons of, it appears to me proper, especially as it may conduce blah, blah, blah. So those can be kind of confusing, but the middle, I think, is easier to grasp. And he talks about, I'll explain that in a second. But the reason I wanted to read this is because, I read it recently. I read it at the end of January, I think. And I was surprised that it's pretty good. And and it's sort of like when I was growing up in the United States, it was like the idea of the nation and the citizen had already really dissolved. It's not like they were deconstructed or anything, but you grow up and you're like, well, especially someone who's more like, I don't know, I wasn't like very nationalist leaning. I was like an anarchist at the end of high school and stuff. So I was like, well, the nation is over, like America's over, like blah, blah, blah. But I think it's important to look back at this period of what nationhood was, because it is pretty unique. Just like the whole Industrial Revolution, the media revolution that came with printing presses and everything. And the fact that it really was a revolution against the British Empire. Even though they were settlers of an indigenous land, it's like Britain was occupying it anyway, and there is, I think, something genuinely revolutionary about what occurred. And I think it's easy to forget because of the way history works. Like, when a revolution does happen, a lot of people are working together who don't really share their values at all. Like Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton hated each other. Aaron Burr, Thomas Jefferson's vice president, literally killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel. And these are people that were all like working on the Constitution. They were all working to create a nation that was separate from the British Empire. And so once you have the success and you set your Constitution and you elect your president, basically everyone starts vying for their own interests immediately, and they want to see the nation go the particular way that they want it to go. And I think that's easy to forget because the United States has been mythologized in a way that I think obscures a lot of actual history. The actual history is to just read it and see what was said. If I could pair this with another reading, I just happened to read this at the same time. I printed them both out. I read the Clean Break Report, which was this strategy paper from an Israel-based think tank that came out in 1996. And they basically talk about, this is when Benjamin Netanyahu was becoming his party, the Likud party, was taking over from the Labor Party, which had run Israel since its inception. And that was this policy paper, it talks about nationhood in not in similar ways to this, but in candid ways similar to this. It addresses the facts of what nationhood is and the way influences play into it and the way that a nation needs to survive. And it's the way, in that paper in 1996, they talk about, how good the destruction of Syria would be for Israel. And now Syria is gone. The Assad rulership is gone, and Israel is occupying a lot of Syria, and Syria is not doing anything about it. Israel also bombed, like pretty much immediately, all of Syria's air defenses. So I think the contrast between those like 200 years of like what a nation means at various points in like the technological development in history, both for like machines of war, it's different, but also for machines of like mind and transferring like information between peoples. Because I think something that George Washington kind of overlooks here, but he does address. It's just it's not clear to them at this point how insidious it's really going to be. Like accumulation of wealth to use influence in media, and basically problems of accumulation and problems of media in general, which really, I mean, immediately that's a problem. It's a problem, it's downhill every president, basically. So it's, yeah, the 19th century was rough for the ideals that were kind of set up in this initial moment, which I think was a genuinely revolutionary moment. So, with that said, kind of a little bit of an outline is he does his intro remarks, and then he talks about how there's this very brief, like really short sentence where he addresses how the love of liberty is it's interwoven in every ligament of your hearts, and so I don't need to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to talk about the unity of government and how the unity of government facilitates the endurance of possible liberty in a free government. And I think that is if I were to do a longer talk on this, that is kind of where I would hone in, because I think that I mean, they had just triumphed in a war, they had just won a successful revolution, they had just formed a government. Like, there actually was like an interwoven, extreme, like kind of historical bond that occurs. And after like 150 years at least of just like of creating mechanisms which actually remove power from individuals and place them in places that are obscured as well, so you can't even really understand where it's going, or that you even had certain powers to begin with. Like that's where we all live. Like, I think power is completely alien to all of us, but I don't think it's necessarily so. I think it's just sort of the mechanisms that we've been born into and raised under. So he's just like, well, don't have to talk about that because we obviously all love liberty. But now there's sort of like, I don't know, I think there's a lot of confusion about what anyone even really values at all, or like wants to live for at all. So anyway, he talks about that, and then he talks about regional divisions. There's sort of a sexual passage that I might laugh at. It just feels, I won't be able to not, I've laughed every time that I've practiced this. So anyway, there's and then he gets into political party manipulation, or just like, he really warns against using political parties. He thinks it just, it sort of corrupts the minds and gets you off course as to what the actual values are that you're trying to do, or trying to make real. And that plays into then foreign influence, as certain parties may have certain foreign relations policies. And anyway, then he talks about religion and morality as a basis for the values. He talks about cherishing public credit and not, wasting tax money. He talks about neutrality on the global stage, a very strong neutrality, wherein every nation should be treated like, I don't know, don't get close with anyone, and also don't hate anyone. And this then plays into like I don't know, like the idea of false common interests between nations. And I think there's a lot of passages in here where I'm going to read them and people are going to be like, whoa, like Trump, Elon Musk, like this is so real. And there's an element of that is real. But I think a lot about even just World War I and World War II, and just like the decline of like, I don't know, the like rapprochement with England, where we became friends with England again at the end of the 19th century. Whereas, he talks about how these shared ideals are often not real, and it's sort of a false common interest that leads to foreign influence. And I think that our greatest ally, Israel, is also an important thing to focus on with that. Anyway, that's the gist. He talks about how, you know, Europe has this set of primary interests, which to us offer a very remote relation. And I think when he's talking about Europe, it's important to think about the Middle East also, and really other parts of the globe, but the Middle East is under the magnifying glass. And then just, general isolationism, protectionism of economic interests. And then he basically is like, you know, I wish that all the things I was going to warn you against would be heeded properly, but I know that, you know, you're going to have to learn for yourself. And then he has just closing remarks. So that's the gist. Hopefully it's kind of helpful because the language is not what we're used to. So yeah, thanks for coming, and feel free to hang out afterwards. And is gonna play viola da gamba, which is do you want to talk about the instrument or the music you're gonna play?
Sure, I'll give a quick rundown. The viola da gamba is a kind of like a bowed lute, if you will. It was a very popular instrument in Europe from roughly the 1450s up through the 1750s, until musical tastes changed, and also music instrument making technology changed, and instruments got much louder, and the kind of music that people wanted to hear got different, and this instrument fell out of favor. This, however, in the colonies was a very popular instrument, especially because in England, which a lot of the settlers were of English origin, the viola da gamba was a very commonly played instrument in the homes of the middle class and the wealthy. These basically came in families, 2 basses, a tenor, and a treble. So people would gather around after dinner and just like play what they called consort music. Also, side note, Ben Franklin played the viola da gamba, so it is George Washington 100% knew what this instrument sounded like. The music that I will be playing are just selections from something called the Playford's Dance Manual, which was originally published in the 1660s and has been continually in print since then. And it is a collection of English country dancing songs, which basically constituted the English-speaking language pop music canon of the 18th century. So all these tunes that you're going to hear have been reworked like many, 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 many times in English like folk music of the 18th century. So these tunes were also ones that Washington would have known intimately, especially the kind of class that he was. He would have been attending social dances from a very young age up until probably his, he could no longer dance. That's it. That's all I got to say.
Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct. And can it be that good policy does not equally enjoin it? It will be worthy of a free, enlightened, and at no distant period, a great nation, to give to mankind the magnanimous and too novel example of a people always guided by an exalted justice and benevolence. Who can doubt that in the course of time and things, the fruits of such a plan would richly repay any temporary advantages which might be lost by a steady adherence to it? Can it be that Providence has not connected the permanent felicity of a nation with its virtue? The experiment, at least, is recommended by every sentiment which ennobles human nature. Alas, it is rendered impossible by its vices. In the execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded, and that in place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another an habitual hatred or an habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur. Hence frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject. At other times, it makes the animosity of the nation subservient to projects of hostility instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister and pernicious motives. The peace often, sometimes perhaps the liberty, of nations has been the victim. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter, without adequate inducement or justification. It leads also to concessions to the favorite nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt doubly to injure the nation making the concessions, by unnecessarily parting with what ought to have been retained, and by exciting jealousy, ill will, and a disposition to retaliate in the parties from whom equal privileges are withheld. And it gives to ambitious, corrupted, or deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favorite nation, facility to betray or sacrifice the interests of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity. Gilding with the appearances of a virtuous sense of obligation, a commendable deference for public opinion, or a laudable zeal for public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, or infatuation. As avenues to foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence or awe the public councils? Such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be the satellite of the latter. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of republican government. But that jealousy, to be useful, must be impartial, else it becomes the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of a defense against it. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another cause those whom they actuate to see danger only on one side and serve to veil and even second the arts of influence on the other. Real patriots, who may resist the intrigues of the favorite, are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is, in extending our commercial relations, to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. Europe has a set of primary interests, which to us have none or a very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves, by artificial ties, in the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics, or the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friendships or enmities. Our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course. If we remain one people under an efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance, when we may take such an attitude as will cause the neutrality we may at any time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected, when belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisitions upon us, will not lightly hazard the giving us provocation, when we may choose peace or war as our interest, guided by justice, shall counsel. Why forego the advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, so far I mean as we are now at liberty to do it. For let me not be understood as capable of patronizing infidelity to existing arrangements. I hold the maxim no less applicable to public than to private affairs, that honesty is always the best policy. I repeat it therefore, let the engagements be observed in their genuine sense, but in my opinion it is unnecessary and would be unwise to extend them. Taking care always to keep ourselves by suitable establishments on a respectively defensive posture, we may safely trust to temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. Harmony, liberal intercourse with all nations are recommended by policy, humanity, and interest, but even our commercial policy should hold an equal and impartial hand, neither seeking nor granting exclusive favors or preferences, consulting the natural course of things, diffusing and diversifying by gentle means the streams of commerce, but forcing nothing, establishing with powers so disposed, in order to give to trade a stable course, to define the rights of our merchants, and to enable the government to support them. Conventional rules of intercourse, the best that present circumstances and mutual opinion will permit, but temporary and liable to be from time to time abandoned or varied, as experience and circumstances shall dictate. Constantly keeping in view that it is folly in one nation to look for disinterested favors from another, that it must pay with a portion of its independence for whatever it may accept under that character, that by such acceptance it may place itself in the condition of having given equivalents for nominal favors, and yet of being reproached with ingratitude for not giving more. There can be no greater error than to expect or calculate upon real favors from nation to nation. It is an illusion, which experience must cure, which a just pride ought to discard. In offering to you, my countrymen, these counsels of an old and affectionate friend, I dare not hope they will make the strong and lasting impressions I could wish, that they will control the usual current of the passions, or prevent our nation from running the course which has hitherto marked the destiny of all nations. But if I may even flatter myself that they may be productive of some partial benefit, some occasional good, that they may now and then recur to moderate the fury of party spirit, to warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue, to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism, this hope will be a full recompense for the solicitude of your welfare, by which they have been dictated. How far in the discharge of my official duties I have been guided by the principles which have been delineated, the public record and other evidences of my conduct must witness to you and to the world. To myself, the assurance of my own conscience is that I have at least believed myself to be guided by them. In relation to the still subsisting war in Europe, my proclamation of the 22nd of April 1793 is the index to my plan. Sanctioned by your approving voice and by that of your representatives in both houses of Congress, the spirit of that measure has continually governed me, uninfluenced by any attempts to deter or divert me from it. After deliberate examination with the aid of the best lights I could obtain, I was well satisfied that our country, under all the circumstances of our case, had a right to take, and was bound in duty and interest to take, a neutral position. Having taken it, I determined, as far as should depend upon me, to maintain it with moderation, perseverance, and firmness. The considerations which respect the right to hold this conduct it is not necessary on this occasion to detail. I will only observe that, according to my understanding of the matter, that right, so far from being denied by any of the belligerent powers, has been virtually admitted by all. The duty of holding a neutral contract may be inferred, without anything more, from the obligation which justice and humanity impose on every nation, in cases in which it is free to act, to maintain inviolate the relations of peace and amity towards other nations. The inducements of interest for observing that conduct will best be referred to your own reflections and experience. With me, a predominant motive has been to endeavor to gain time to our country to settle and mature its yet recent institutions, and to progress without interruption to that degree of strength and consistency which is necessary to give it, humanly speaking, the command of its own fortunes. Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert and mitigate the evils to which they may tend. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service, with an upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest. Relying on its kindness in this as in other things, and actuated by that fervent love towards it which is so natural to a man who views in it the native soil of himself and his progenitors for several generations, I anticipate with pleasing expectation that retreat in which I promise myself to realize without alloy the sweet enjoyment of partaking, in the midst of my fellow citizens, the benign influence of good laws under a free government, the ever-favorite object of my heart, and the happy reward, as I trust, of our mutual cares, labors, and dangers. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was about this country. That was. I didn't know what to expect going in, but that was fascinating to hear.
Yeah, I thought so.